Hey everyone, we finally got around to doing the answers part of the Q&A that I asked you guys to submit all the questions that you submitted either on YouTube or Instagram or whatever. No, it's not like I've got like a professional recording studio or anything, so I'm hoping that like sound is okay and the picture's gonna be okay. But anyways, the point is we're going to try and get to all of your questions, so let's just dive right into it. Okay, so first, a question that I get asked a lot. My channel is all about Procreate. Do I ever use Photoshop? Do I ever use any other programs? This sort of also leads into another question, which is just like, who am I and what do I do? For those who don't know, my name is Mike Henry. This is my channel. I've been working in video games and animation and toys and all that stuff for about 14 years now. So when people ask like, do you do this for a living? I don't do the videos for a living, but I do art for a living. So that sort of answers a lot of that right there. What programs do I normally work in? Do I always work in Procreate? I've really only been working in Procreate for a little bit over like a year and a quarter or so. When the iPad Pro came out, I wasn't entirely sure as to whether or not I was going to get in on it, and then I tried it and it was really cool. And working in art, you know, it's sort of, if you can, it's always best to try and keep up with new things. And so I sort of jumped on iPad Pro fairly early and just tried to get involved in Procreate as quickly as possible. I had downloaded Procreate way back when it first came out, but it wasn't really until the sort of marriage of the iPad Pro and the Apple Pencil and Procreate all coming together really made a lot of sense to me. So I do use other programs. In fact, professionally, what I use most often is Photoshop. A long time ago, which you might be able to still find some of them online, I used to do streams on Livestream. If you search for Zatransis, my name that's sort of like everywhere, and try to find me on Livestream, you might find some of those old videos. So the good news is a lot of what I do here on this channel for Procreate actually translates perfectly fine over into Photoshop. There might be some specific UX or UI things that are specific to Procreate that aren't in Photoshop, but a lot of the general theory and the methods that I employ, I use all of those in Photoshop as well. So another question is, what do you currently do for a living? I don't really have a lot of time to do much freelance these days, but what my main day job is, I'm the director of art for new games at a video game company here in Germany called Big Point. I've been there for a year and it's been great. I just relocated from San Francisco to Germany a year ago, and it's been a wild ride. It's been awesome, and so I've been at Big Point fulfilling those duties for a year now. I adjusted the camera. Let's see if that fixes the focusing issue. One of the questions I got was, what is the biggest drawback to doing art on the iPad versus doing it maybe at a computer using Photoshop or something like that? The biggest drawback is the environment in which you do art on the iPad is basically like whatever environment you want to be in. And there's sort of good and bad to that. The good is that I can be doing art anywhere, technically. In fact, most of the time, all of the art that you see me do here on this channel was done just like on my couch watching TV. Occasionally, I might be in a meeting room at work, or I might be, you know, somewhere completely different that I haven't thought about. Recently, I went to GDC in San Francisco and I did a lot of art in the hotel room, and I even did editing of one of the videos in the hotel room. So that's the best part. And so then the flip side of that is you're not always in the most sort of ergonomically positive setup. So you're not always sitting in the best chair. You're not always at the right height, with the right desk, with the right this, with the right that, all the stuff that they sort of believe in for lining up your body in order to be able to do art for a long time in one sitting. That's not the greatest. And then the other thing would be, the main thing that drives me crazy is just the fact that since I use Procreate has a layer limit based on the dimensions of your canvas. And I like a lot of layers, and Procreate doesn't really allow for a ton of layers once you start getting up to sort of print resolution, which is more or less what I work at. So for me personally, in my personal workflow, I've had to rework a lot of things in order to compensate for that. Another question I got was, what did you study, or how did you study in order to do the art that you do today and to bring a drawing to finished quality and all of that? I guess the official school-based answer is I went to the Illinois Institute of Art, and I studied media arts and animation, which is just sort of like a catch-all degree. That was sort of to prepare you to exit school and sort of just get a job kind of doing a lot of things, although most of the time they just spit people out to do sort of 3D animation, general 3D art. Even though you could obviously break away and do 2D, which is ultimately what I did. I got my first job in the video game industry as a 3D animator, and then I quickly realized that that was never really my passion, reworked my portfolio, and then became a concept artist in video games. So to actually get to the look that I have today, or the art style that I have today, and what did I study, I mean, that's just sort of that general thing that any artist will tell you. You don't necessarily study so much as you just let lots of things influence you. And then if you're doing art every day and you're sort of like you're compelled to produce artwork, that influence is going to come through you one way or another, whether it's your favorite artist or it's something really abstract like the food you had that day or something. Like that's really just over time where it comes from. And then to sort of bring it to a finished quality, that's practice. That's almost exclusively practice and just self-evaluation and trying to measure a delta between where you were yesterday and where you are today, or where you were last month and where you are today, so that you can try and figure out, did I improve on the things that I was hoping to improve on? This is a bit of a complimentary question, but it's basically just how do you get your line art to be so fluid and clean? Really just comes down to a ton of practice. I don't really have any hot tips for this. The only thing I can say is that rest assured that I don't draw the perfect line every time. If you look at some of the Procreate videos, you might see like a line appear and then disappear, and line appear and disappear. This is pretty common, especially in digital art. Obviously, nothing disappears in traditional art, but I mean, the getting the stroke wrong and then having to redo it, that happens a lot of the time in digital art. So I think that you'll see that it's not like I'm just blowing through it and getting like this perfectly clean line. There's a lot of work that goes into that. Sometimes you go over the same area a number of times. So it's practice, basically. Imagine maybe driving on a bumpy road. I mean, you can imagine it that way. Let's say you're doing that all the time for a job. The first time you ever go out on that bumpy road, you're probably going to be all over the place and the steering wheel is going to go all over, and you're not necessarily going to keep the car straight. But eventually you learn to know that road, and you learn to know the car, and you learn to know what you can handle on those bumps, and you just sort of even that thing out over time. I think that knowing your hand is really important, knowing what your limitations are, knowing to push straight lines and pull curves. Ideas like that, I think, are really big. And otherwise, it's really just sort of like learning your own quirks and learning to work around them. What do I usually find inspiration in? Anything. Really. You should hopefully be able to, at least on a little bit, on a small level at least, find inspiration in just about anything. That said, if I'm going to go with the inspiration out of anything story here, I would say that the things I get the most inspiration from is other art, other games, things like movies, and I mean it's all art, but I just mean 2D art versus like movies, animation, all of that stuff I get very inspired by. I'm inspired by a lot of things that clicked with me at certain ages, which a lot of people are. So, you know, Disney Afternoon and Final Fantasy VII and anime in the mid-90s, and Giant Robo is one of my biggest inspirations, and music. This question is, how is shading a woman's face different from shading a man's face? And then it sort of cites when I did that demo where I had the dude's face, the 5-part demo, and I put like 5 o'clock shadow and stuff on it. Well, I mean, it sort of depends on it's sort of like a terminology issue here, right? Because shading, if we're talking about shading being putting shadows on things, there's no difference in anything except for just sort of observing materials and light and doing your best to represent form. So you could talk about the anatomy of a male face versus a female face and sort of like what the inclinations of the average male face are and the average female face, but I really can't give any specific differences. Now, when you mention 5 o'clock shadow, that starts getting more specific. You're talking about the actual sort of like genetic differences, I guess, of the male and female. And so if we're talking about like whether or not you add blush in certain areas or you add just various, you know, facial quirks, facial banding. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that can go into it. You could go back through a lot of my old YouTube videos and you can see chicks and dudes, and you can see how I handle different ones. So that would probably help a little bit. And then I could try to do another one in the near future. This question is about how I get my lines to blend in with what I'm working on. I'm also going to try and tackle another question that I get all the time, which is how do I go from having something that's lined to having something that has no lines? I'm going to talk about both of those as fast as I can.
Basically, if you see lines in the final drawing, but they're part of the drawing, they're not just laid on top of the coloring underneath, that's usually done through multiply or overlay or something along those lines. Along those lines. Lighter, it becomes more translucent. When you have a color on it, it affects the colors that are underneath, and then you can absorb some of what's going on underneath in the lines. That's basically that. And then you might see me adjust the opacities of all that in order to make sure that the play between the lines and the shading is what I want it to be. Now, the other question of how do I go from something that's lined to something that's not lined? I get that question a lot, like at what point do you abandon the lines? And I think I've actually touched on it in a couple of videos, but it's really just about feel. It's about drawing and drawing. You do the drawing and then you start painting. And when you start painting, the lines are like at a stronger opacity, like maybe 20%. And then as you're painting, you get them down to like 10%. And then eventually you realize you've got enough information in the paint that you can kill the lines. Because that's really what the lines are there for. The lines, it's sort of like a level of complexity or level of detail stack where it's like a line is one of the simplest ways you can denote form because it's quick. And so it's just there for the information for when you have to put all that extra work into doing something that's painterly. You can just be like, okay, well, right here is where the nose is. And then you just keep that around until you've rendered that enough to where you know exactly where that nose is and then the lines go away. So, I think that answered that.
What are my favorite pens in Procreate? I don't have any favorite pens. If we're talking very specifically about the pens, I just sort of use what I can when I can. I've messed around with the brush pen and that's okay, but I don't have any preferences there. If we're talking about just brushes in general, everybody knows about my fat pencil that I made based off of just the technical pencil that's in Procreate, which there'll be a link in this video so you can see that. And then for the painterly stuff, I like using a number of the paint brushes that they have in the video that I'm going to release next week. I use the acrylic brush. That's pretty fun to mess around with. And yeah, that one's pretty simple. When did I take art seriously? The person who asked this said that they're 29 and they started really loving art about a year ago and they feel like they're too late. Too late is always relative. You're only too late based on a future goal. So if your goal is that you want to be a professional working artist at 31 and you're 29 and you just started teaching yourself, that might be hard. You might be able to pick it up. You could be somebody who really gravitates towards it and pulls it off and everything's great. But you're probably too late if you have like a goal a year from now or 2 years from now. But if you just want to become an artist and be working, you're never too late for that essentially. Unless you're like, I don't know, on your deathbed or some shit. As far as when I started taking art seriously, I've been sort of like murderously serious about art since I was in like kindergarten. Always drew all the time, and I distinctly remember my first grade drawing Ninja Turtles all the time, and that's sort of my earliest memory of very deliberately drawing something all the time. And then and I've just always wanted to be an artist. I didn't really know how. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know in what way I was going to be it. I just knew that, you know, this is true for a lot of kids, but cartoons were my life, and video games eventually became another part of my life. And I just knew that like the creative energy that I had was going towards something like that, and I had to do something with that. So I basically wanted to professionally be an artist since I was in like first grade, basically. Am I afraid of people copying my original work or ideas? And if not, why? I don't really worry about it. I obviously would be irritated if somebody took just like a drawing of mine and turned it into a feature-length film and made $1 million off of it. That's pretty unlikely. I'm sure that I might inspire someone here or there that might influence even just like a toenail on a character at some point. That's just sort of my belief that the whole art world sort of influences each other, and that it's fine to just sort of put stuff out into the you know, mind space, the collective mind space, and because the same thing's happening for me. I mean, I'm benefiting from people sharing their art all the time as well. So I just sort of like giving back into that. And if, let's say, a major thing happened where it made a ton of money based off of my art, I would probably be able to do something about it. I never feel like an idea I come up with is so precious that I have to defend it forever. If I come up with a really interesting character design and I put it out into the world and somebody else ripped it off, just sort of for fun, like they just did a drawing where they ripped it off on some level, I would be screwed if I had no more ideas. If that was the extent of my ideas, then I'd be screwed. Okay, this is a pretty intense question. So essentially, not intense from a personal standpoint, but intense in terms of there's a lot going on here. So basically the question is, they see that a lot of the artwork that I'm doing is digital, and they sort of hate the feel of their digital work, so they're mostly traditional now. And the ultimate question is, in 2017, do I feel that digital artwork is, or how do I feel about making a successful business in 2017 off of digital artwork? Then it sort of wraps it up by saying, like, is it better to be digital? I think that just, it's 100% based on what it is you want to be from an art standpoint. Obviously, if you go to like a con, you see tons of people that are selling prints, and that's usually digital, and they are making a fair amount of cash, and they basically did like one piece of art once, and then they replicate it 1,000,000 times in prints, and they sell that at a much lower price than you would if you were buying the original art. That's sort of like the simplest way of saying that's how you make art digitally, make money off of digital art. Then the traditional side is obviously you do like one piece and you charge more for it because it's an original, and then you sell that and it's gone forever, and then you can never make money off of that again. And that's why, you know, super successful fine artists make a lot of money because they are charging extraordinary amounts of money in galleries. But are you going to make that much money at like a con, especially if you don't really have a name attached to you doing traditional artwork? You probably won't pull in that much. In fact, sometimes I see the rates that people charge for a commission at a con, and I'm all for people giving affordable art to people. That's great, but like some of it is just, it's really low, and for the work that gets put in, it's pretty crazy. So for me personally, I like the digital aspect of things right now, but I'm not really selling a lot of my art outside of like sort of my time as an employee of a company right now. I don't really sell my books right now. I have PDFs on my website of all my books, but that's really just because it's easy for me to distribute that to people, and it's cheaper than for everybody than having to mail the book and everything. So for me, digital is the way to go, just because it's similar to the way an indie musician might make a track and be able to sell it on Bandcamp or something. It lowers your overhead basically. So I like the idea of being able to do that. Sell a PDF, sell a digital tutorial, sell something like that, than having to actually keep inventory around and manage all of that. So this next question is from a hobbyist, an art hobbyist who picked up an iPad Pro and wants to ask how often they should be drawing and practicing. They mentioned that they'd like to take it into something that they can maybe make money from someday. I mean, the hardcore answer is you should be drawing all the time. You should draw as often as you can. If you have a moment of downtime, draw. The people who are the best there is at drawing on the planet and painting and all that kind of stuff, they do it all the time because they just wanted to. It was just sort of like in their blood, so to speak. So I think that the answer to the question is just, if it's something that you believe that strongly in, then it's something that you really like. I know you said hobbyist, but I just mean that if it's something that you want to convert at some point into a more serious pursuit, then it should be all the time. If you always want to keep it a hobby, then just make it fun and maybe set some light goals for yourself. And when you have the time to draw, then you can maybe work towards those goals, because that type of growth might be something you want to measure and something that you can then say, oh, this hobby was very valuable to me. But if it's something that you really want to make serious, you have to take it seriously and you have to draw as often as possible. This question is about character design. Do I have tips on how to get into character design, not in terms of getting a job, but in terms of just getting into the process of creating characters? And it even goes on to ask if I would be willing to do a video where I sort of build a character from scratch. The good news is, not only am I going to do another one of those soon, I have done a few of those in the past. I think the most extensive one was the video that I have for a character that I designed called Gregory, who I designed just for this channel, basically. If you go back through my history and you find that, that's a good one. I go all the way from a really rough thumbnail all the way to a finished character with a headshot, so it's pretty good. As far as general tips go, you're gonna find a lot in there. I think that I don't have any tips that I can just give you like this right now. I think that all the tips for character design are about studying really good character design. It's about practicing it. It's about looking at bad character design versus good character design. It's about redesigning bad characters using things that you learn about how to design good characters. So that to me is sort of like the biggest tip, is to just look through as many resources as you possibly can around this. Whether it's looking through art by people you admire who you think design really good characters. I think that that's just the best way to do it, as opposed to me giving you like 1 or 2 tips right here. That said, color blocking. This one is just asking if I can do some Photoshop work for the channel. Maybe someday, if I can get a really easy setup for it. But right now, I have no workspace to speak of other than at work, and I don't really want to make videos at work for this. That would have to be it. I'd have to have a workspace that's completely devoid of screaming children. So this question is about how I moved to Germany, why I moved to Germany, and how I subsist out here in Germany. How do I get work here? So I get work here because I don't do freelance work. I work for a company, and I moved to Germany because I got the job at the company. I essentially interviewed, and there was a need for me in a specific role, and so they made me an offer, and I moved out here and worked there. So as I mentioned earlier, I work at Big Point, a video game company out here, and it's just that simple. So I work essentially a 9 to 5 there, and that's how I pay my bills. How many hours a day do I spend doing art? Not as many as I used to, because the role that I have in my day-to-day job has a lot of managerial components to it. I'm currently overseeing a number of games from an art standpoint, and then we have art directors and art teams on all those individual teams. So a lot of that is talking to them, trying to provide them with what they need, and then here or there, depending on the project, I can offer up some of my art skills. So I don't actually draw a ton on a day-to-day basis because of that. That said, recently I've been trying to do more of that at work. So I probably get maybe an hour or 2 a day at work. And then if I have the energy when I come home, I will draw from the time my kids go to bed to the time I go to bed. So it's like roughly from 8 to 11 or something like that. So basically on like an average day, maybe 5 hours of drawing. How do I break into this industry? Unfortunately, it's not specified here which industry. I primarily work in video games, though I have dabbled in other artistic industries as well. So the best I can do is speak to the video game industry. That said, there'll probably be some stuff that I mention here that applies to all of them. And also, when we're talking about the video game industry, it depends on what it is you want to be in the video game industry. So let's just make it just about me and how I did it and what I am in the industry. I'm currently an art director in the video game industry with a strong background in concept art. And so the way that I originally broke into the industry actually was just I graduated from college and I got an internship at a video game company for animation, which I mentioned earlier. Then after I realized that that wasn't at all for me, and I took the big move from the Chicagoland area to the Bay Area, I just submitted my portfolio to as many people as possible. I continued to do art and try to raise my profile online as much as possible. And I essentially tried to hone my craft while also trying to expand how many people knew who I was. And that eventually led to me getting a job as a concept artist on a long-running project that unfortunately never came out, but it was a ton of great experience. I was a concept artist for 4 years on a video game, basically, and that sort of kickstarted the initial bulk of my career. So what does this translate to for you in terms of something that's demonstrable? I would say that draw all the time, work hard all the time, find a good way to present that hard work, and make it as accessible as possible, and get it in front of as many people as possible. That's really it. A lot of people, I think, are looking for a particularly special way to break in to any industry. And as somebody who hires people, I can tell you that good artwork is all about visibility. If I see the good artwork, I want to hire the person. That's that easy. I mean, it's easy to say. Let's put it that way. Hello. What do you like more, color sketches or simple ink sketches? I don't really like either one more or less than the other. They both have their place. They're both fun to do. They're both fun to look at. So yeah, I don't really have a preference. The only thing I can say is that a sketch can sometimes have the exact same emotional impact that a painted piece can, and a sketch takes way less time to do than a painted piece. So I guess that's the advantage there. Please do another line art demo of the new version of Procreate. I don't exactly know what you're asking for here. I do line art all the time when I'm doing my pieces, so maybe more specific. What kind of art do you not like or style that you're sick of seeing? I don't know. I usually don't have a specific style that I'm sick of seeing or necessarily like hate any particular art. I generally dislike like the finished product of something, but not necessarily like the components of it, like the style of art. Like I might dislike one particular game for various reasons or one movie for various reasons, but I would say like in terms of the individual components, I don't really like hate any art. So I also got a question about doing, it sort of references the line art stuff that we were talking about before in terms of fading it out, but it mentions photorealism, like doing a video in photorealism. That's just not me, so you're not going to get that from me. Does it take effort for you to stay active in your craft? And then it sort of goes on to say, like, are you constantly motivated to do it, or do you have methods for finding motivation? I think that I would say for the most part, I have constant motivation. But constant's a little hard to say. I mean, everybody's got that day where they're particularly exhausted and they just want to like turn their brain off for a while, and sometimes you can do that and still doodle, and other times it's just not working out. So I would say that for the most part I am constantly propelled, especially if you take into account sort of like professionally everything that I do, everything from art direction and mentoring and management and drawing and painting and all that kind of stuff. I always have energy for at least part of that. Do I always have passion to sit down and bang out like a 8-hour painting like every day? Probably not. And as far as methods go to stick with it, or to sort of like get over a lack of motivation, I find it can sometimes be frustrating, but I find that even if you're drawing and it sucks and nothing's coming together, and you spend the night doing 5 drawings and none of them are really anything you like, and then you just sort of close up and you're frustrated, and then you sort of get on with your life. I've come to sort of accept those moments. They suck, and I know that there's other methods like walk away for a while, or stick with the same thing even if it's not working and see where it goes, or whatever. But for me, sometimes sometimes I can have tons of creative energy and no focus on what it should be, and for those I usually end up just working something until the instant I'm feeling frustrated with it, and then I start a new one, and then a new one, and a new one. And then sometimes at the end of the night, or better yet, the next morning, sometimes it's easier the day after, to look at all of them and then sort of eliminate the ones that have no hope, and then sort of keep some of them around that might have a future. How do you draw perfect circles and shapes? I don't. I guess the question is more around like, are there tricks to doing this? Obviously, in something like Photoshop, there are a ton of tricks to doing this. You can do strokes, and you can modify the strokes, and you can use different brushes for strokes. You can even just the way the selections work in Photoshop, and the way anything from a smart object to a mask or any of that kind of stuff works. You can do shapes much more easily. I think also in Adobe, is it Adobe Sketch? Yeah, I think it's called, yeah, Adobe Sketch. They have lots of great tools. Like they've got French curves and stuff in there that's really good, and that's something I really wish Procreate would have. But In Procreate specifically, I do circles by going into the airbrush section, and I use the hard round, and I use that for circles, and I can use it in a number of ways. In fact, in the piece that I'm currently working on, I'm in the middle of sketching it. I use a technique where I essentially stamp a circle, then I warp it to the actual ellipses that I need it to be, and then I duplicate that, and I shrink it just a little, and then I select that and delete away from the first one. So now I've got like this ring, right? But then that ring is gonna be perfect. It's not gonna look like the pencil from the rest of it. So then I treat that as a selection, and on a new layer, I just roughly go around it in a circular motion, and it sort of fakes like if you had a ruler or something like that. So that's really what I do for circles. And for other shapes, I haven't really needed it. You don't really need it for like a perfect square, because with Procreate, you can do straight lines and you can lock them to like 90-degree angles. So that's pretty easy. But I don't oftentimes have too much of a need for other specific shapes. What would be the best way to get a dynamic look in your art? They reference shapes in the question, and even reference Joe Madureira and his ability to have really dynamic shapes. To be honest, I don't know if I right out of my head have an answer for that. I think that the best I can do, like if we're talking stagnant shapes, like having a dynamic shape in just sort of like a character that's standing there, I think that there's a couple of things. One is you can imply motion even in a standing just sort of still shape in order to give it some sort of a momentum. You can do expressive anatomy in order to try and get a dynamic shape. You can use contrast as far as like thin and thick in a design to get a more dynamic shape. For me also, I just really prefer emphasizing the purpose of a character. So that can get you a dynamic shape. So for instance, let's say you've got a character who is let's just use a robot because that's very easy. You've got a robot who's supposed to punch the shit out of something. Then you obviously can make the fists huge because that's its purpose. So it obviously would be built with the biggest fists. And then you take like its legs and you bring its legs down. And maybe its head isn't so significant because there's nothing really special that it has to do with its head. So that shrinks down. And then you end up getting this like dynamic, big-fisted robot type thing. And then on the flip side of that, you could have something maybe that's like, I mean, this is really just using the inverse of that, but you've got like a jumping robot. So for that, you give it much more of an athletic physique. It's less of a brawler. Its upper body is thinner. Maybe it's built a little bit more like a swimmer, but then you do something really interesting with the legs to make the legs really forceful looking. Those are good ways to get dynamic shapes. And there's millions of varieties of this, but the dynamic shape comes from the fact that you're trying to emphasize a purpose. And then by emphasizing that purpose, you're sort of downplaying other aspects and you're picking and choosing what it is that you want to exaggerate. And then that can give you a really dynamic shape. So I guess some of those rules might be part of that. Unfortunately for me, the easiest way to explain dynamic shape is to take something that doesn't have dynamic shapes and try to do like a red line or a paint over or just a redraw of that to try and get there. So maybe that would actually be an interesting future video where I take something that maybe some submitted art or something like that the artist feels isn't dynamic, and then I try to do something dynamic over it. That's a pretty good idea. Maybe I'll do that soon. Instagram. Switching to Instagram. Can I recommend any art books? Sure. There's a lot of great art books if you're looking for inspiration. Some of my favorites are Todd Shore's art book is excellent. Here's the Todd Shore one that I mentioned. That's good. That's a good one. Let's see what's a really good one. The Monster Hunter book from a bunch of years ago. I've had it for a long time, so I'm sorry I can't tell you exactly which one it is, if they even have multiple ones. Here's the Monster Hunter one I mentioned. This is really dope. But it was this great book. It's like in landscape, soft cover, but it's in a slipcase, and then it comes with a secondary book. The secondary book is all black and white sketches, and then the other book is like some highly rendered stuff, but then it's also tons of armor sets. That one is great as just sort of like a resource, source of inspiration too. I think that a lot of the creature box books are great. Actually, I'm standing next to my bookcase. Let me go take a look. Yeah, other art books. Eric Canetti's like insane book. That's a really good one. The Iron Giant one is good. There's a lot of them. I mean, really, it's sort of getting harder to pick out art books. They sort of all collide into one another as I'm trying to think of them. I think the other thing too is I also like just books that have art in them, and I sort of consider those as reference more than like a dedicated art book. So I'm not saying that to sound pretentious, books with art in them, like I'm discovering some shit. I just literally mean like comics and manga and stuff. Like those sometimes to me have a better collection of art because like I don't necessarily need the explanation behind the art. I might just want the art itself. So by having the art that just exists, it has to exist in order to tell the story. That's cool too. So like Blade of the Immortal by Hiroaki Samura is awesome, and I'm a big fan of Gunsmith Cats, and I've always been a fan of Meizani Koku. It's not like the craziest art, but it's like one of the most consistent art styles on the planet. And the same goes for Case Closed. I love Case Closed art. See, the reason I keep looking over here is I'm looking actually at my bookshelf. There's just a lot of really good stuff out there. The question is, as for sparking creativity, how do I inspire myself to put the art down on the page? That just comes from this sort of natural desire to draw. I mentioned earlier that I've wanted to be a professional artist as literally as long as I can remember, and that just comes from the fact that I just always drew all the time. And so if I'm bored for a minute, I just draw, and that's sort of how it happens. The cool thing now is because technology's gotten so much better, I can decide to just doodle something even on like some shitty lined piece of paper or something. I can take a picture of it with my camera, and then through iCloud I can just pull that down into Procreate. I can erase away the lines. I can start paint. I mean, it's awesome. So yeah, that's it. Have I named my beard? Was the question. No, it won't let me. Am I working towards a personal goal or a project or a book? Not really. I had the idea last year to try and find like every sketch I've ever done, even if it was already included in another art book, just get every sketch I can possibly find, make sure it's scanned, cobble it together in sort of like a massive sketchbook, and just sort of release that as like a digital thing. And that's still kind of cool. It's not that aspirational because I'm not creating anything new for it. So that's probably why I'm not that compelled. But I think that for my own personal records, it would just be like a neat thing to have and people might like it. So I've thought of doing something like that. Otherwise, I'm just sort of getting to the point in my career where I really want to tell a few stories. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that. But otherwise, I don't really have anything close right now that I really want to go for. Assuming that I have ideas all the time, what makes me pick one and actually take it to finish? It's true. It's true that you have to pick and choose, right? Like anytime you're choosing to do anything in life, you're choosing to not do a bunch of other things. So when it comes to art, that's true. Although I don't feel like at any one time the options are too overwhelming because I'm usually writing whatever I feel like doing at the time. When you all are looking at these YouTube videos, the nice thing about these videos is I'm doing them all just because I want to. There's never really a have to involved in any of them, as opposed to like a job when somebody says like, hey, draw Spider-Man for this amount of money in this amount of time, and it might still be really fun, but it's all a job. This is 100% just whatever I feel like. So most of my free time is that. And so I don't know that I necessarily feel like I'm really choosing, because it's literally just like getting something down on paper and then I go, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll just finish this, as opposed to stopping and thinking to myself, what else could I be drawing? That said, I did recently find a handful of drawings that I have always wanted to take to a final render and never got around to it. So I'm finally going to do that. So now would probably be the only exception where I've got like 5 drawings sitting around that I think would be really cool to have painted. So I'm going to try and get to that soon. Okay, so this is just sort of a numbered list. This person wants me to name what traditional tools I use, good art books, and my art education. So I've already mentioned good art books. I already mentioned my art education. So good tools for traditional art. Really, I am a bad guy to talk to for tools. If you've been watching these videos, you know that I largely only use the brushes that are in Procreate. So there's, not a lot of fanciness or special use there. The same is true with traditional tools. Most of the natural stuff that you see me use, like either on my DeviantArt page or on Instagram, or some cases you may have seen me take a traditional drawing here, bring it into Procreate and then paint it. That's all drawn with Colorase pencils. Depending on my mood, it's either going to be carmine red, rose, or indigo. Every blue moon I'll use their purple, which I think has a fancier name, but I don't remember what it is. And then I ink it with a Bic pen, the standard Bic pens that you can buy in the store. And then if I'm really feeling fancy, that whole thing would have been done maybe on brown craft paper with like a texture, and it's all, it's like a slightly dark mid-tone. And then I'll use like a white Elmer's white paint pen to do like an outline, or maybe to bring the eyes out or some shit like that. So I don't really use anything too special. Wow, this one is dense. So instead of reading it and memorizing it and then saying it to you, I'm just gonna read it right here off of my iPad. This person wrote, hard and soft lines, coloring a piece. What's the typical brush you use for coloring in your graphics? Where does your character style come from, like influences? Best ways to sell and promote your art. What's your favorite social media platform? What are the best places to start with when approaching the art industry for work? How many pieces do you typically do in a week? What's your least favorite and your favorite piece you've done, and can we see them? Wow, that's a lot of questions, but I'll quickly go through them all. I think we can do it pretty good.
I don't know what the hard and soft lines means exactly. And then you go to coloring a piece. What's your typical brush you use for coloring in your graphics? So when I'm on Photoshop, I almost always am using the hard circle brush that has the opacity fall off due to pressure, and my eraser is always the really soft airbrush, the like big fuzzy one. That way I can come in and I can put something really hard in if I need to, and then knock it back with the softer brush. So that's in Photoshop. And when I'm painting, I set the opacity at 100% and the flow anywhere from 10 to 20%. For those who don't know, because I also get that question a lot, I know that a lot of you are probably watching this because of Procreate, not Photoshop, but the difference between opacity and flow is opacity is the maximum amount of paint that the brush will put down in that stroke, whereas flow is the rate that the paint comes out. So for instance, if you have the flow at 100%, but you have the opacity at 50%, and you put your brush down, the paint's gonna come out immediately at 100% speed, but it'll cap at 50% opaque because you have it at 50%, and it will stay that way while you're stroking until you release your hand off and then put it down again, and then it'll lay down another 50% opaque. However, if you were to flip that, and you were to have 100% opacity and 50% flow, the instant you put your pen down, it would put out the paint at 50% the speed that it normally does. But if you hold it in place, or you keep going back and forth until, and you don't lift up your brush, you will eventually lay down a full 100% paint. So if you look at it that way, when I say that I put my flow at 10 to 20%, that means that I'm setting it so that the paint's coming out somewhat slowly, but I can get to 100% in one stroke very easily. So that's opacity and flow, if you're wondering, for all you Photoshop folk. Continuing with this, where does your character style come from? Like a lot of artists, I'm influenced by a number of things. My biggest influences, I think I wear pretty clearly on my sleeve. I really learned how to draw in the mid-90s, so I get a lot of influence from comic books, people like Joe Mad, people like, not so much these days, but at the time, people like Humberto Ramos, like the whole Cliffhanger crew, and then a lot of anime and manga. Giant Robo is a huge influence on me. I mentioned Blade of the Immortal earlier, and Hiroaki Samura, he's a big influence on me. As far as digital painting goes, because as time went on, obviously my influences would change based on the type of art that I took on. I was influenced a lot by Todd Shore. I was influenced a lot by like a lot of just sort of the digital art community that's all putting out stuff. And then I'm also influenced by things entirely unrelated to art, where I'm trying to mimic something that I've seen somewhere. So, it's still an art, toys, but like I might be trying to mimic like a toy, or I might be trying to mimic, something else. Best way to sell and promote your art. I think I sort of touched on that. It's really just about like work hard, produce a lot of good art, and be as visible as you can be through social media and trying to sell things and trying to be visible in whatever world it is you're trying to be visible within. So if you're trying to be visible in comics, try to do as many cons as possible. If you're trying to be visible in video games, go to game jams and go to and try to produce maybe a small demo of something, or animations that look like they would be in a video game, things like that. What's my favorite social media platform? Probably Instagram, although I spend a lot of, if you call it that, I spend a lot of time on YouTube these days, both between making videos and watching a ton of videos. I guess it's social media, but I love Twitch. I love the interaction on Twitch. I think it's really cool. So maybe someday I'll start painting on Twitch. I don't know, we'll see. I pretty much hate Facebook and Snapchat. Snapchat's the worst. And I mean, that wraps it up, basically. What are the best places to start when approaching the art industry for work? I mean, that's just create lots of cool art and reach out to the places you want to work at. If you're good, they'll hire you. It's that simple. How many pieces do you typically do in a week? Well, if I were to completely cut out my day job, like 1, maybe 2. Including my day job, I do a lot of little stuff throughout the week. What's your least favorite and favorite piece you've done, and can we see them? My favorite is whatever I last did, and my least favorite is probably whatever came right before that, or what I'm currently working on. I don't know if I actually have a piece that I've sort of like held in my mind as like, oh man, that's the worst one I've ever done. But I think that it's less about having like a bad one or a least favorite, and more I think sometimes about having one that a lot of people like and you don't know why. I think that's the more sort of like, that's sort of like the one that sticks more in your head, I guess. And for me, actually, I mean, I've got a couple. If you go on DeviantArt, you can like see stats and you can see what the number one ones are and stuff. My number one viewed deviation on DeviantArt is a Calvin and Hobbes sort of tribute type thing. So I get it because it's a fan art. It's something that people really did. But on like a rolling basis, when I post like this piece or that piece or this piece, it's really hard for me to figure out sometimes why something might get 4 times as many likes as this thing.
How did you land your first art gig? And there was a follow-up to that. What do you have planned for the future? Nothing planned right now. Again, since I do have a day job, we've got a lot of stuff cool that's going on at Big Point, so you'll probably see that soon. But then as far as how did I get started? Well, I got started actually doing freelance stuff in high school and college. For like, a bunch of just sort of garbagey stuff that never really went anywhere. And then my first gig I got because I graduated college and there were a handful of us going over to one particular company. Sorry, the blurriness isn't getting any better. This is not a high-tech setup. Somebody asked me what type of books do I like to read. I honestly don't have the time to read a lot of books. Basically anything that takes my eyes, I just kind of don't have the time for. So on the flip side, reading, I do read quite a bit, but I just don't have the time for books. It's usually like news in and out of work. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and my favorite types of audiobooks to listen to are memoirs, either memoirs or sort of this is what I've learned type books. My favorite ones are like the Amy Poehler one and the Tina Fey one, and the Steve Martin one is awesome. I also like, for instance, listening to Creativity Inc. That was a good book. So that's kind of my favorite thing to read. As far as reading for entertainment, meaning anything that's fiction, I mean, growing up I read comic books and manga to a crazy degree. So that would probably be the pure entertainment stuff I like reading. What size iPad do you use? I use the 12.9 inch. That was an easy one. Do I think Procreate will be able to hit the same level as Photoshop? I think so. I think we'll get there to some degree. I sometimes don't really believe that Procreate's ultimate goal is to be Photoshop. I think that there are certain things that Photoshop will just always have the control over due to the fact that the environment, the form of how you are when you're using it is different. So there are certain things that while I wish Procreate had, that Photoshop had, just like, maybe crazy amounts of layers or pen tool, that would be dope. I use the pen tool all the time in Photoshop, so that'd be really nice. Those types of things I think would be cool, but Photoshop is also a bit of a mess, so I don't want it to entirely go the way of Photoshop. I don't want there to be the 3D text tool, and I don't want there to be just a lot of the bloat that's in Photoshop I don't really want in Procreate. So hopefully Procreate will always sort of have a focus on what they want to be, and if they want to release something that does a lot of that other stuff, just make it another app and have there be like a nice sharing between the two of them. What would I recommend for tips on making characters exaggerated but still proportional? This one's hard because I think that when you're talking about proportions and making exaggerated proportions, really it's all about deciding what rules you're going to break. There's lots of relational rules when it comes to human anatomy or just anatomy in general, even things from like aesthetic anatomy versus expressive anatomy, things like that. The tips are to understand more or less what a lot of these rules are and that way you know which ones you want to break. For instance, there's a lot of sort of general rules about the face, like at rest, the corners of the mouth lining up with the center of the eye, and the fact that eyes are one eye apart, and that the ear roughly lines up between the bottom of the brow and the bottom of the nose. These are all things that are pretty standard, but if you want to break them because you're trying to do something really specific, or you're trying to get to a certain emotion with a character, or you're just trying to exaggerate them for the fun of it, then you need to know which one of these you don't want to use. I mentioned aesthetic anatomy too. There are certain rules that essentially break the way a person perceives whether or not something is aesthetically pleasing. There are times where you might want to do that because you're deliberately going for something like that. There are other times where you want to make sure you don't do that. I think a pretty decent example of that would be if you go all the way back to the book, How to Draw the Marvel Way, and they sort of show at one point, like, it's been a while since I've flipped through that book, but I had that book growing up, but they show that like merman type character, I think it was, and they show him sort of like still using a lot of the same rules as the handsome main dude, and it sort of allows that character to still be attractive and aesthetically pleasing to somebody, but then they can still be like a mer monster or a merman or whatever. That is another example. So as far as general tips, the best general tip I can offer is to just, I guess, learn anatomy, then figure out what you're trying to do with your character design. Is there a purpose to what you're doing when you're pushing and pulling these shapes? And then just be aware of what you're breaking from when you learned anatomy, and make sure that you're sort of reconciling it in a way that still leaves the character sort of balanced and logical within their own universe. I'm trying to record this in my basement, so you might hear kids screaming, so sorry in advance. Have I used Affinity Designer? No, I have not. How long have I been using tools to produce digital art? I first got to use, I used MS Paint a long time ago. I used to do these little like sort of pixel arts of X-Men characters fighting each other in a city. But that was, long time ago. I wouldn't really call that like a foray into digital art. The first time I got to touch Photoshop was when I went to college. I really hated it when I first learned it. So if the question is like, did I struggle with it at all? Then yes, I did. I used Flash for like everything when I started out. In fact, if you go through my DeviantArt gallery and you go all the way to the beginning, all of it's just Flash. And it's because for me at the time as an artist, I loved the idea of doing sort of like a flat blobby shape and being able to just like select it, and the fact that it was non-destructive, and the fact that I could take something like trace bitmap, and I could take a ink drawing and make it as clean as possible, and I could even then go through and bend all of those like Beziers and everything. That I really liked and used as like a crutch, and never got to Photoshop because of that. Then it was finally like as I was graduating college that I really took the time to sit down with it, and it was a mess when I first started learning Photoshop. Again, go through my DeviantArt gallery. It's sort of the nice thing. I've got sort of a record online. You can see exactly how bad to where I am now, and you can maybe if you're somebody out there struggling, you can see that the struggle is real in all of us. Then it just was practice. It took me a long time to get there, especially on the digital side. I've been doing traditional art my whole life. Basically. So getting into the digital stuff and actually making sure that I could do competent digital work took a while. And I mean, in the moment, I probably thought I was doing competent digital work way before I now feel I was, if that makes sense. I was professionally working in the industry doing work that I'm completely ashamed of now. So yeah, I was asked about line weight. The person who asked this they mentioned some people using thicker lines where there's shadow and thinner lines where there's light, or the idea of using thin and thick to denote distance, or to denote just separation of shape. To be honest, I don't think about it a ton. I do a lot of it based on, I guess you could say, experience and intuition. I know these rules that you're talking about, and I've tried them out from time to time. I think that sometimes they've worked out for me, and other times they have not. So as far as an exact rule as to how I do line weighting, I can't really offer that, unfortunately. Now, some of what you mentioned, though, I do employ in a deliberate way, and that would be to separate things or to block out shapes. That is sort of probably the most deliberate time where I will use where I will actually make a conscious decision about the line weighting that I'm using. Another thing that I'll do is I will usually use bolder lines on the outside of forms and then finer lines towards the inside of forms. And for me, a lot of what I use line art for is for separating form. So for instance, if I've got a character with like a big schnoz and I might have like a somewhat hard line, a thick line around the outside of them, and all these details might be on the thin side. But then like that big nose might have like a hard line to define it, so that it pulls off of the backside of the face. That might be an example of a time where I'm being really conscious about it, or especially if I'm doing a really rough concept that I'm going to hand to somebody, I might use a thicker line just to separate out big chunks. So like if I've got, and this might not only be for rough concepts, but it's definitely for rough concepts. So if you've got like a crazy armored character and I've got like a ton of squiggly lines in there and a lot of fine detail, I might take like the big forearm section and make sure that's got sort of like a heavier outline around it. And then the shoulder piece might have a heavier outline so that I'm sort of chunking out these sort of readable parts. So as far as other rules like the shadow and to the light and all that, there's some amount of that I probably will touch on naturally. I just don't really think of it consciously when I'm doing it. And the times where I have thought of consciously doing it, it's not consistent enough for me to where I like it. That said, I'm sure some people that actually do that deliberately and produce wonderful artwork would be able to show you exactly the right way to do it. I just might not be that guy. The other thing too is when you're talking about just like a pure line drawing, in a lot of ways you're using line to denote where the shadow is, even if you are just sort of, putting a line where the bicep is. I mean, that's sort of what you're trying to denote there. You're denoting that there's enough of a shadow there where you see form change, and that's why there's that maybe cartoony line there. And then the other thing too with line art is you might use a thick line around the entire figure because it's just all you have is black and white and you're separating that character from the background. But then like maybe under their arm where their like obliques are, you might have that be really dark because you're also denoting shadow. And that's sort of the weird thing about line art is that you have to make all these decisions about what you're using those lines for. Are you going to be super realistic and you're only representing shadows, so then you have to find other ways to have the contrast pop that character off of their background? Or are you going a little bit more on the cartoony side of things and you're just saying, well, an arm's there, so I'm drawing the outline of the arm. So that's sort of like all the choices that you have to make, and sort of from piece to piece I might make some of those choices. Is this something where I'm going to be doing all of the shadows in color later, or is this something where I want all those heavy shadows to be in the line art from the get-go? So I don't have a lot there to offer you in terms of the exact methodology regarding light and shadow that I use the lines, but I think that hopefully that touched a little bit on ways that I might use it. What is my favorite TV show at the moment? That's kind of hard because my wife and I do quite a bit of jumping between sort of like new things and old things that we just love. We just completed a rewatch of Law and Order, classic Law and Order. That's one of our favorite shows, and we have the box set, so we just finished the 20 seasons of that over the course of a while. It's not like we did that in like a week. For instance, right now, something that's brand new, but also very old at the same time is the reboot of Mystery Science Theater 3000. So I love that show. I was a backer on the Kickstarter for it. So I've been watching the new episodes since Monday or Tuesday when they came out. I can't remember which day they released them to backers. And now it's on Netflix. Everybody can watch it now. So I guess you could say that's sort of my favorite show right now because it's like new, but it's also like old. So it's kind of hard. I would say there's nothing super brand new that I'm really into right now, but we're about to get a bunch of brand new stuff. Like Better Call Saul is going to come back, and I love that show. So me and my son watch a lot of old Disney cartoons from the 90s. Does that help? We were watching Rescue Rangers right before I came down to tape this. So tape this. How old am I? Jesus. One question was, do I think a 32 gigabyte iPad Pro will work? I always recommend, as much as possible, no matter what digital device you're talking about, to get the most storage possible. It's one of the cheapest things you can do with any device. Usually the price goes up not that much because of this one subject. So I say go for as much as humanly possible. On my iPad Pro, I have the 128 gig. I wish it was even more when I got it. I do a fair amount of backing up using various cloud services, so I'm safe. I'm not running out of room or anything, but I just always love having as much room as possible so that it's never on my mind. So I would recommend, if you're willing to go the extra dollar amount, get the biggest size possible. Do I take requests? No, not really. I mean, I will take a request, like I might post on Instagram something to the effect of like, hey, I'm gonna draw something tonight. What do you guys think it should be? And then I might pick something that somebody suggests. But I don't do requests from the standpoint of, if it's like a commission question, I don't do commissions. I just don't have the time for it right now. Are there any blending options in Procreate? I guess the question there is like blending modes, like on a layer, and there are lots of layer options, so you can do that. If the question is more around blending two colors together, there is a smudge tool. I don't use it. I just in general have never used a smudge tool when I paint, so I don't have a lot of knowledge around it, but I know that that exists. What is the best resolution to work in on Procreate? Or at least which one do I find the best? I essentially have two dimensions that I work in all the time now, just because it's really easy for me to work in them. One is just 8x12 and then 12x8, just so that I can get one that's portrait and one that's landscape, and they are in general pretty good. And then I use them at 300 DPI. The reason that I use this exact setup is because I find that it's the best bang for my buck as far as resolution goes, and then as far as layers go. I always forget the exact number that I can have, but I think it's like 52 layers with that setup, which is it's a good trade-off for the resolution that I'm getting. When I work in Photoshop, the first thing I do when I'm doing anything is I just open up a 6,000 pixel by 6,000 pixel canvas at 300 DPI, and then I just sort of start sketching, and then once I sort of figure out exactly what I want it to be, I crop it down to the cropping that I want that piece of art to be, and then I go from there. I wish you could do that in Procreate, but it's much, well, you can't really. I mean, you can copy that entire canvas into something brand new, but you can't crop, so I don't have that workflow in Procreate. Is there a good inking brush or inking pen in Procreate that does sort of a bit of a lazy mouse setup? That was a specific question. So there are some inking brushes. I find them all to be fairly good. Nothing too special, but definitely useful. And then is there a lazy mouse thing, or sort of like a stroke correction? Yes, there is. I always forget exactly what it's called in Procreate because I don't really use it. There are a couple brushes that have it already built in, and so I might notice it when I'm doing it, but I usually don't employ it deliberately, so I don't know really what all the settings are there, but I know that it's there, and there's some videos you can probably find on YouTube. I've sort of seen them go by where somebody's showing how to do like calligraphy, and they're using that quite a bit in order to try and get the smoother shapes in their lettering. So you can probably find a video online that'll show you everything you need to know about that. This question's a little bit complicated. It's what color tones do you find is best for skin? Well, actually the question doesn't say skin, it says face or body or anything really. So to focus on skin first, color tones that I use all the time, I mean, you could definitely say that I operate in sort of a similar palette depending on who I'm drawing, but that's more or less just sort of my general color theory. More often than not, I'm just always going from a cooler shadow to a warmer highlight, and then sort of anything that fits in between there is what I go for. The reason there's no recommendation for what skin tone you should use is obviously there's different ethnicities on the planet, so you're going to have to figure out different ones for a lot of different things. I think that the logic behind all of this, of the sort of cool shadow to the warm highlight, will work on anybody as long as you're then calibrating all of your other values in order to match whatever their ethnicity or their own personal skin might look like. As far as shading anything really, I usually do go with that scheme, that sort of cool shadow, warm highlight, because that's the natural lighting that you usually get in a lot of circumstances. Obviously you can have much higher contrast or much lower contrast, and there are plenty of instances where you might not have that, but that's also just sort of the pattern that I end up enjoying the most. Also, when you see me do something that's much more rendered, I'm usually choosing all the colors through that gradient. If you pick up my book, which you can't buy it currently because I haven't figured out a good way to ship from Germany yet because I'm lazy. If you pick up, let's say, the PDF of my book off of the Big Cartel website, you'll see that I actually include some color swatches in there, so you can pick those and maybe dissect from there. You can even just, as I was mentioning in one of the other questions where I say that I would deconstruct what somebody else did, and that's how I learned, I recommend you do that. Take something that I've done, bring it into Photoshop, and just use the color picker and pick like the shadow through the highlight and see what colors I specifically use there, and maybe try to reverse engineer it for yourself. That can show you how to do it quite a bit right there too. That goes for anything. So I would recommend taking anybody's art that you love, bring it into Photoshop, analyze it for the exact question that you're trying to figure out, and then on your own see if you can employ some of those same ideas. So this question is around how I choose the color of the line art that I'm going to use in a final piece that has line art. That actually just completely depends on my mood at the time. I think the sort of obvious go-to, if we're just talking like a standard out of the box, I'm not going to think about it that much, it's going to be like a light brown set to multiply. The reason for that is because the warmth of the brown just usually goes well with almost anything, and on top of that, if you set it to multiply and it's on the lighter side, it's going to pick up some of the underneath color, so you'll get that mingling that you're looking for there, and that's pretty good. I mean, that's just, for me at least, that's what I'm looking for, so that there's some harmony both in the lines, but the lines are still very much there. Another part of this question was, how do I decide what I'm going to hide or show on the lines? Again, that's just all mood. It's really how, I guess you could say, how like rustic I want the picture to look, so I may include the roughs in there. I might maybe take the rough layer and set that to like an overlay, and then make the final lines like a little bit heavier or something like that. I think a good example of that is the zombie video that I just recently put up, Bone Machine, that's what it's called. And you can see the red and the blue sort of guidelines underneath in the final piece, and that was me just at the moment saying, that seems like that could be cool, let's see what that looks like, and then I sort of adjust it on the fly. This question is, can you take a look at my workspace? Honestly, the workspace would just be a photo of my couch. Maybe I will include that. Maybe right now while I'm talking, an image has popped on screen. Maybe I was too lazy when I edited it, so one didn't. It's just me sitting on the couch drawing. Next question was, how has my workflow and the way that I created art changed from the time before I had my iPad Pro to now? I think that the biggest change there is simply the although it sounds like I'm just being whiny, it's sort of like the barrier of entry at home, especially after I had my first kid, to doing art, to getting off the couch, sitting at my workstation, this is like I said, this is gonna sound really whiny, but I mean, it's the reality. Bringing it back from sleep, firing up Photoshop, finding the last file that I wanted to work on, maybe toying with a couple of other files, actually doing that entire process. And then also, weirdly enough, the just pressure of I'm at an actual computer doing the actual work. All of that started to get to be too much, especially if, for instance, with the kid or something else, I had to just like drop everything I was doing, completely change gears and come back to it. Again, it's kind of hard to explain, but that just seemed to be too much. So I actually did a lot less artwork after my first son was born. And as time went on, all of my art energy just went to work or to when I could randomly sketch something. I wasn't doing nearly as many finished pieces, whether it was digitally colored like on the level of a watercolor, or it was more rendered out. I just wasn't doing it. So now, ever since the iPad Pro, although in the very recent past, I haven't been doing all that much work because I've just been too busy. I was producing way more work once I got a hold of the iPad Pro. And then the overall workflow was just the fact that I could sit at my couch and literally just sort of like the same way you would reach over and check your mail, I could reach over, grab my iPad Pro and start working. That meant a lot as far as me just getting in and doing some artwork. I think there's one other thing that was pretty major was picking up something that was sort of brand new in a lot of ways and sort of teaching myself that was also really compelling. So that I think was a major part of it. So I was also asked what books, courses, classes, videos, anything like that I would recommend for a starting artist to just sort of get a head start, I guess. This one is always very hard for me to answer a lot of the times. I'm not somebody who buys workshop videos or flips through tutorial books. I very, very rarely do that. Now in my career, I do it a little bit more than I used to because I'm looking a little bit more for the academic side, especially when I'm going to be maybe explaining something in a future video. I might actually make sure I've got sort of all of the terminology and the way to explain it down pat before I say make a video for you guys. But for the most part, I don't do that. The way that I more or less taught myself, because my actual style of painting and style of drawing, I did not learn in college. I sort of just developed it over time, my entire life kind of thing. It was more or less from just deconstructing the stuff that really inspired me. I think that if you go through my work, you'll see a lot of obvious influences, and then there's also a lot of really secret influences that make their way in there. And for me, it was all about sort of, I would see something, it would either be I would watch an anime or I read a comic book, or I would see a painting, and there would be something about it that really grabbed my attention, and I would wonder, can I replicate some quality of that? It could be as simple as I see an amazingly painted Christian Lichtner page of comic book. Like for instance, Ultimates, when Joe Mad and Christian Lichtner were the art team on Ultimates, that was pretty inspiring. So instead of, hoping that there was a demo out there that say Christian Lichtner did for painting, I would instead grab some line art from Joe Madureira online, and then I would just sit and try to replicate that look. And it wasn't necessarily like I would replicate that look and then show everybody and say, hey, everybody, look, I can do this. But it was more the exercise of that. Can I replicate something like it? And then through that, you start finding all your little methodologies to get there. So that's one example of how I might deconstruct something that's inspired me in order to try and learn and develop myself. So I don't have any good suggestions there, but there's tons of them. So I think that if I'm not the person to suggest it to you, there are plenty of people out there who can suggest that for you. Could I do a full how-to on how to draw a dragon? Probably not, but maybe. A question that I get all the time is whether or not I'm willing to do a critique of your art, or whether or not I'll just give like some general feedback. As far as getting back to people on YouTube and Instagram, I try to be as responsive as possible. So if somebody just asks me a real quick question, I try to give you your answer as fast as possible. As far as critiquing, critiques can go a lot of ways, which is why I'm very open to giving critique, but I sort of like to make sure that the other person is prepared for it ahead of time. There's two major things with a critique, which is why a lot of people don't do them, and why I might hesitate to give one. The first thing is, how serious of a critique are you actually looking for? A lot of people want a critique. They don't necessarily just want a pat in the back, but they're hoping that the feedback is going to be something small that they can just tweak, and now they've got everything that they're looking for in their art. Art doesn't really work that way. So instead, I'm hoping what people are looking for is like a hardcore critique, like something that's like really about the artwork and it's really about all the ways that can improve, because the result from that should actually become not a concrete list, but essentially like a list of things that you can do to then work on and improve and get better at it. That's the way that I like to take critique, and that's the way that most people who are excelling or people who are taking the learning of creating art seriously, that's the way that they go about it. So if you're looking for like a real in-depth critique that actually will give you plenty of things to work on, I love doing those. I'm happy to do those. Yeah. The other reason though why I might hesitate is because one of those in-depth, meaningful reviews takes a lot of time, especially if it's written. If it's something where I have to type it out, either you've messaged me on DeviantArt or you've hit me up on Instagram or email or something like that, it just takes a long time. I'm really happy to do them in person because obviously I can ramble a lot and I can fill time pretty quickly. So that's easier for me. But if it's something written, that's the only reason why I might hesitate. So to those of you who are looking for critiques, I would say be very honest with yourself about the type of critique that you're looking for, and then feel free to ask me and I'll let you know whether or not I've got the time, either on a YouTube video or messaging me directly. I'll do my best to make time when I can. I get asked a lot to do videos for where I'm sort of breaking down a topic. A lot of my channel is about me basically just doing a piece of art, and then I sort of walk you through it, and if I happen to stumble on techniques, then I might explain those. I get asked a lot about lighting, whether or not I can do a lighting tutorial. I probably will. I think it's getting to the point now where people have asked enough times for it. I should probably get around to doing it. The reason that I haven't is because this channel is really just a place where I found that I can easily output these tutorial videos. So let's get into that for a minute. I've also been asked before just sort of like what my process is like and how I create these videos and all that. Essentially what happened was I loved doing those live streams a long time ago, but doing those in real time was a big commitment. Having to make sure that what I was streaming wasn't official work, that I had time to do something that wasn't official work, and that I could just sit down for like an unbroken 6 hours or 8 hours to paint something it was a little bit too much of a commitment. So when Procreate and iPad Pro and Apple Pencil all came together and I had all that in one big bundle, I realized that I could output the time-lapse videos automatically. What that meant for me was that I could take whatever amount of time I wanted to create a piece of art and I could break it up into millions of sessions if I wanted to. Millions is a little crazy, and then I could always put out that same video that was concise and it didn't have a lot of just sort of random bullshit in it. So that allows me to do whatever I want to do, stop in the middle of doing the art and do something else, zone out because I'm watching TV, and then go, oh right, I'm drawing, I'll get back to that now. It allows me to do all of that and then still give you guys that same quality thing. As for the rest of my workflow, because a lot of people ask that, I output that time-lapse replay just straight into iMovie. Right on my iPad. My entire process is basically on my iPad. So I draw the thing, I export the time-lapse replay, I put that into iMovie, I put my bumpers on it, like the black screen at the beginning so that it fades in, the sort of title card, then I take that video and for an easy video, I just slow it way down so that it fills up the time. And then on the back, I put the see me on the internet one and the other black one so that it fades to black at the end, because the mobile version of iMovie doesn't have as many bells and whistles as the computer version. And then wherever I am, plug my headphones in, the same headphones that I listen to music on the train every day, and I just hold the microphone there and I record that entire thing and I spit it out. Once the piece of art is completed, it really only takes me as long as that video is to get that thing done and put it up on YouTube for you guys. So that is my entire workflow. I love it because it's quick, it's light, it's not too involved. When I have to do the ones where I use the tripod and I do all this kind of stuff, like that's when it starts getting much more involved, and that's why videos like this take me much longer to get out to you guys than the other ones. And so then the last question that some people have been asking, but it's not actually part of the Q&A, but I just wanted to include it, is where have you been? Because I was putting out videos on a regular basis and now I'm not so much. Really, it's just general busyness. I was working on a bunch of pieces. I was putting a bunch of videos up around Christmas because I had lots of free time because I was like off work and I was doing that type of stuff. Hit like a really good inspiration patch and did a lot of cool stuff. And then sort of leading up to, I went to GDC in San Francisco at the end of February, and that was sort of like the leading up to that. There was so much work to be done at work, and there was stuff going on at home. Nothing terrible, just stuff. And then when I was on that trip, I think I uploaded one video, and that was me just sort of desperately trying to get like a video around. And then I got sick, so I was really down, and then trying to find like cool things to do. So really that's it. That's the only place I've been. I've just been very busy. And then this Q&A video, I was really hoping to get this out sooner, but doing the normal videos that I do is way lower impact for me than doing something like this. Right now I'm in my basement, and I am, my kids are asleep upstairs, and I've got lights on in here trying to do this. So I think that it's one of those things that where if I'm gonna do more things like this, I sort of need to figure out something that's a little bit smarter and just a little bit more conducive to my lifestyle, because I'd love to do more things like this. I just gotta find the way to do it. So anyways, thank you for all your questions. It was great. I will continue to answer questions in the YouTube videos in the comments section, as I've always done before. And this was just sort of something fun, so I could really get at a lot of the stuff that people have been asking for. It was really cool just to see everybody's questions and everybody participating. So thanks a lot for all the views and the encouragement and the suggestions and all that. Thank you for all of the questions so that I can make this video. And I think in like a week, I'm gonna have another video out with more art. So I hope you dig it. So thanks a lot, and see you soon. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.